Alright, let's take a jab at this. I have no doubt you're aware of the disturbing amount of sexual assault alleged to have occurred on New Year's Eve in Cologne and other places, Hamburg, Stuttgart, but Cologne's what people are talking about. Or, at least, talking about now that the story's spread after having been suspiciously slow to come to light, and then having been suppressed in certain parts of the internet, by moderators on Reddit, for example. But now it's well and truly out there. I've done a fair bit of reading, looking at opinion pieces and straight-up reporting, and there's plenty that could be directly picked apart or responded to. However, because there's so much, I've decided to run with a sort of structured rant about some different bits and pieces of this story and the responses to it. I didn't believe it on first reading a headline. 1,000 men organized to attack women in Cologne. But while some of the numbers were and are a bit fuzzy, it quickly became clear that this was a real story. And then I had to wonder, how did I miss this? It happened on New Year's Eve. Surely it should have been everywhere almost immediately. And yet, it wasn't. Which, embarrassingly I think, brings us to what was known about the alleged perpetrators. It has been widely reported that witnesses described the men as being of North African or Arab appearance. Now, it's not their appearance on its own that's important, obviously. It's about what that tells you they're likely to be. Immigrants. And Deutschland is very protective of them right now. For example, you've probably heard news of social media platforms agreeing to clamp down on German anti-migrant posts. This sensitivity has led, unsurprisingly, to suspicion about the way things unfolded following the attacks. Suspicion backed up by German broadcaster ZDF's apology for not reporting on the news when they could have. And suspicion now also reinforced by the head of Cologne's police force having been made to leave his post following the force's failure to control the situation, and a New Year's Day press release from the police department describing the celebrations as having been largely peaceful. It will also not go unnoticed, however imperfect the parallel between these two situations, that when it came to protest of the New Year's Eve attacks, local police had no problem showing up with all the gear they needed, dispersing rowdy, violent crowds with water cannons and tear gas. On top of this, following the attacks, the Interior Minister for North Rhine-Westphalia, hope I'm saying that right, has said what happens in right-wing chat rooms is at least as bad as the sexual assault of the women in Cologne. Obviously, these attacks are going to be used by extremists to incite hatred, but is that as bad as, or worse than, actual assault? I don't think so, and they'll be doing it with or without real events anyway. Unfortunately, hate-mongering doesn't undo the fact that this happened, in spite of the stories of mass sexual assault reading like right-wing propaganda come to life. What's weird to me is, at the same time, he has acknowledged that this is different. According to the BBC, he said, the police have to conceptually adjust to the fact that there are apparently groups of perpetrators who assault women en masse. What's being said by this one guy doesn't quite mesh up for me. And if you do as I did and just search for information, there's an even greater sense of things not quite lining up, of priorities clashing. I can't say I think accusations of an attempt to cover up or minimize what happened are unreasonable. Now just consider for a second the effect of this confusion and statements about the danger of what people are saying online, combined with the knowledge of clampdowns on social media and the overall tension surrounding the issue might have on Germans. Maybe you are German actually, in which case tell me how you feel in the comments. With all that I'm reading, I could easily imagine people being afraid to speak their mind, even if it's calm and rational criticism of immigration, from people who aren't even against it, in case it gets grouped with something more sinister and puts authorities' eyes on them. Are people really feeling pressure to remain silent? Based on the sudden surge of Germans messaging me privately when I touched on the topic on social media, it looks to me like the answer's yes. I'm sure you're unsurprised that this concerns me, but it's especially ridiculous now it's been reported that asylum seekers are indeed among those suspected to have been involved. Discussion of Germany's open door approach to accepting migrants can, at the very least, be said to be relevant. I don't see how that can be denied. And with that discussion is going to come some anger. And that anger is not just going to come from racists and bigots. Is Germany's sensitivity going to mean thoughtful people with no intention of inciting hatred or violence can't discuss the truth, or what's being reported as the truth? Is it okay for a German to write on the internet that they want no more immigration, that they want no more refugees to be taken in because of this? Regardless of your agreement or disagreement, should that be something that leaves me wondering? The behavior of police and media in response to sexual violence, apparently due to who the perpetrators were, is going to start pressure building up behind any fear of speaking. The self-harming oversensitivity on display has not only shocked me, but made no sense. Wouldn't the most pro-immigration thing be to make it clear you can deal with any criminals among those coming in, to make sure you are being exceptionally transparent? To not have your promises and token actions come only after you've been effectively caught screwing over the public, and to not make your citizens afraid to speak. Forget hate mongers. They don't need to do anything to make people hate what's going on. And even now that Merkel's proposed tougher law regarding criminal migrants, the damage in terms of public trust is, I think, going to be very hard, if not impossible, to undo. This is one step forward after multiple steps back. And speaking of backward steps, let's take a look at the mayor of Cologne. She suggested that women need an updated code of conduct to avoid getting assaulted, with keeping an arm's length from strangers being one example of what they can do. If only the women attacked on New Year's Eve had been given such valuable instruction. Everyone knows that rapists can't move, so just keep your distance. Don't make fun of her though, or send criticism. In a Spiegel online interview, she said she's already been subjected to a ton of that. The poor thing. Which I have to say I find odd that she'd even care to mention it. She's been stabbed before, so I find it odd that ridicule would even register. But back to the point, her suggestion. It's like this politician tried to struggle for a middle ground between suggesting self-defense and avoiding accusations of victim blaming, ending up saying the worst possible thing. I think anyone with any perspective on this can easily criticize it. In the spirit of positivity and helpfulness though, I've come up with my own advice for dealing with sexual assault from migrants, and I'd like to offer it as a submission to be added to their new guidelines. Take a look at this. If you must wear a short skirt, consider not wearing panties. This will streamline the dissipation of cultural tensions and make it end faster. Perfect, right? It barely even sounds like acceptance of rape and sexual assault from a particular group. I think it will fit in nicely. So yes, overall, the way Germany's government and press have dealt with this has been quite embarrassing. Actually, I'd say it's more accurate to say it's horrifying. Looks like the feminists were right. There is a culturally ingrained problem with sexual assault and how it's dealt with, in Germany at least, and depending on who the perpetrators are. But commentary doesn't stop at Germany's border. Plenty of people have been writing, and articles range from anti-immigrant fury fests to more subtle, slippery manipulation from other angles. The clusterfuck everyone expected when the news broke, in other words. There was one angle that stood out to me though, and it's present in a significant amount of what's been published about the attacks. For example, there's this wonderful piece published by The Independent. We should look to the gender of the Cologne attackers, not their race. Those who have never fought for women's rights will opportunistically use women's sexual trauma as the vehicle for their xenophobia, another brick for their much-loved border. Don't listen to their spin, listen to mine. Mine even has a healthy dose of deflection and false dichotomy. Here's their ending point. Cologne should act as a wake-up call to attack the gender violence that pervades all societies. It must not become a battle cry for those who oppose the idea that maybe, just maybe, we have a moral duty to those fleeing from genocide, famine, and civil war. If it wasn't migrants, it would have just been local men, I guess. The perpetrators of these attacks being foreign is really a coincidence, and what's in their head regarding treatment of women is no different to any other man from any other culture. Oh, and the alternative to that approach is being a heartless monster, of course. Over the past few days, this is the kind of thing I've been reading a lot of. For the most part, the only people I see tackling the situation directly are people taking a strong anti-immigration stance. Then, when that's countered, instead of any kind of direct takedown of points or analysis of what actually happened and what it means, I repeatedly find myself reading some variation of, "No, you." Or, in the case of the Young Turks, instead of reading it, I got to hear it from a guest of theirs.
So sexual assault and rape, I'm not a sociologist, so I don't know. All I know is pretty prevalent in all societies, right? I mean, look at the Catholic Church, right? Look at that, what happened, just raping kids and covering up, and at the very top. And these aren't just morons on a street on New Year's Eve, right? So, in fact, the Kaiser Foundation said that they did a survey, 1 in 5 women will be raped or attempted raped while they're in college.
Right. Oh, it's an epidemic on college campuses.
So all of a sudden we go, blah, blah, blah. But we have a big rape culture problem here in the United States, right?
You know what? He's right. We really need to curtail that mass Catholic and frat bro immigration before these issues get worse. Don't worry, German government, police and press. The rest of the world has people working to brush this away too. Let's see just how much tension we can build together as an international community. Let's have one more little taste, one more teeny tiny glimpse of another thing that makes this kind of point. This time a bit from a piece that was originally published on Vice Germany, so we're hopping back inside the border. Immigrants aren't responsible for rape culture in Germany, in which it's asserted that the clearest thing to come out of the debate around what happened in Cologne as of yet is that Germany has a sexism issue and a racism issue. Both are deep-rooted and were not imported. It's our responsibility as a society to move towards a culture that celebrates mutual consent and respects boundaries. And that applies to all people, because one sexual assault is one too many, no matter where it took place and who it involved. For some odd reason though, if you go read the article, there's no specific mention of Germany having a pre-existing issue with men organizing into gangs to strategically isolate and assault women en masse. People must just be so used to it that we only notice when it's a different group of people doing it. It's clearly all absolutely equal and evenly spread around the world, so mass migration surely must have next to no influence in this regard. Just make sure there are consent classes for everyone. Some men just happen to be further ahead than others, Some just need to learn affirmative consent. Others need to be taught that screaming and physical resistance means no. It's really just shades of grey. All men are the same. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up with a good old-fashioned rant. Supporters of mass immigration cannot continue to cross their fingers and hope nothing like this happens or gains attention. It's happened, it's happening, and news of it's all over the place. The downside of this side in the trade-off between keeping things the same for yourself and the people you care about, and saving foreigners from violence and persecution is in the spotlight. They have to justify the cost. No more wiggling, no more deflection. I don't give a shit about them tattling on the hypocrisy of their opposition. They need to sell me their position on this directly. Not just by telling me how racist some of the people against mass immigration are, even if their accusation is correct. If you lean toward prioritizing saving those running from horror in their homelands, you're going to need to tell me why something like what happened on New Year's Eve in Cologne is an acceptable cost. And don't forget that there are reports of similar problems elsewhere too. Looking at Germany, I see a country incapable of doing what would need to be done to make me sympathize with those who are supportive of mass immigration there. Even if there is no significant difference in rates of criminal behavior between locals and foreigners, as I've been told is the case, it's apparent to me, after these attacks in particular, that there is, and will be, a difference in response to such acts. This is certainly an incredibly unfair situation, both for those attacked or at risk of being attacked, and for respectful, law-abiding foreigners who will be unfairly hated as a result of this incompetence and self-destructive hypersensitivity. But it is the situation Germany looks to be in. It counts. It's part of the issue. It's important. And as long as regular people in Germany are afraid to speak openly about this, and actively made to fear speaking openly about this, I don't see it changing. Efforts to make mass immigration work have become exactly what's making the problem unsolvable. Exactly what's making people afraid, and exactly why people should be afraid. The ballsiest, most hate-driven people are not going to be deterred from speaking by any of the measures or pressures meant to stop them. And they're going to be who's heard, whether their hate directed at immigrants and immigration, or those opposed to or afraid of immigrants and immigration. I think they are only being empowered. I've just read in an article published by The Guardian that on Sunday, gangs were attacking immigrants in Cologne. They don't give a shit. They're gonna do that with the tiniest excuse. They haven't been suddenly pushed to that. But I do have to wonder how many people who feel like they're being shit on might not quite mind that so much as they would have in the past. How many people who feel betrayed might be considering the possibility that at some point things are going to need to come down to violence. From the outside, it looks like room for discussion of a solution, whatever that may mean, is decreasing, with a race toward breaking point having been kicked off. And, as it stands, the only good thing I can see coming out of what's going on in Germany is an example for the rest of us of how not to do things. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions. This month's Blacklist Collection artist is Days, at Triangle Days on Twitter. She designed this shirt for me. If you want one, there are links in the description. They are only available until the 14th.